Welcome back to Outlook from the Inside. I'm Mike Greenwald. I'm the head of business tax for Friedman LLP. And with us today is Will Mendez. Will is head of our Cyzen Cybersecurity group. Welcome, Will.
Thank you, Mike.
One thing you may not know about Will at one point was an aspiring astronaut, but that has nothing to do with the scenery in his background. Don't expect to see him flying the space shuttle or something like it over the back. Will, today we're going to be talking about the whole gamut of cybersecurity, but more specifically, we're going to really try to hone in on what it's like when you have a distributed workforce, how to maintain visibility and the kinds of challenges and threats that are out there and what businesses can do about that. So let's start off with the basics. Can you just highlight for us the changes that occurred going from a traditional work environment to where we are now, where we're working remotely?
So now you've got employees using applications on the internet or on these cloud platforms. So there you kind of see, you lose a little bit more of the visibility and the control, because now an employee doesn't have to access these resources internally to your organization, right? You don't have to poke the holes in it, but now they're accessing it somewhere else. So you lose a little bit of the visibility as to what they're doing and how they're accessing it.
So explain what you mean by visibility, because that, has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. And I get the feeling that that's a very specific meaning for you.
Correct. So visibility within the context of security is knowing how a person or a user is first accessing an information system, how they're accessing, are they using a username and password, are they using multi-factor authentication? And then once they access that information, what exactly are they accessing? So, because you want to make sure that they're not accessing anything that they're not supposed to. So when you talk about visibility from a user context and security, you're talking about what they're accessing it and how. In case they do get compromised, then you have to think of how would I be able to know if their account is compromised, because then it's a bad actor that's accessing these resources that they're not supposed to access.
So all this new technology that's out there, all this new cloud software and the like, I remember my dad always saying that, never buy a car in the first year after it comes out because they're still working out all the kinks. Is that true with new technology as well? Do you have to kind of wait and let somebody else be the pioneer in using it?
Yes and no. So, and the reason I say yes and no, yes, just like, like you said, with buying a car, you never really want to be the first one to do it because there might still be some kinks in there. And the same is true with technology. When it first comes out, there's bound to have problems. There's, you would hope that hopefully the vendor considered security when they implemented this technology. So there's going to be issues associated with that. So the trick here is that you want to do what they call a risk assessment. So if I'm going to adopt a new technology, I need to look at what are the security risks associated with that technology. If I'm putting it in my environment, if I'm giving my employees access to it, I need to understand what are the security risks. So for example, if I am deploying a brand new technology and the only way a user can authenticate to it or connect to it is a username and password, and it doesn't support, what's now established to be a good practice of multi-factor, then I need to think about it. What is the risk of that particular application maybe being compromised because one of my employees gave up their password to a phishing attempt or other type of social engineering attack. So, if what I'm storing there is not that sensitive, then maybe that's okay. But if I'm storing personal information, then I want to make sure that that technology is protected as much as possible. So these are kind of questions that I would ask if I'm going to move to a new technology: is what is the impact it's going to have to my security requirements and posture?
So now on to another favorite topic, ransomware. What's the latest in that world? We haven't heard much about it lately, but what's the latest in the world of ransomware?
Well, ransomware is still evolving. It's still a very popular means of getting money or for the cyber criminals that perpetrate it. So, when it boils down to it, it's a crime as old as time. It's really extortion when it's just by a different means, right? Instead of kidnapping somebody and holding them for ransom, you're basically kidnapping somebody's computer resources. So that hasn't changed. If anything, it's getting more profitable because if you notice, a lot of either local governments, schools, they're all getting hit with ransomware because it's very easy. It's an easy way to monetize a specific event. So again, when you boil down to it, it is malware, and malware is very easy to get into an environment, and it propagates pretty quickly.
So what do I do to prevent it?
A lot of time malware takes advantage of a vulnerability within your organization. So you want to make sure you've got, you're doing your patching, that you're patching vulnerabilities for software as it comes out, because that way it minimizes the chance that malware will, in this case, ransomware, will exploit that vulnerability and then take hold of your environment.
So now I'm going to circle back to the beginning. Let's say I don't want to have to deal with the problem of a cyber breach. What should I have done at the beginning? I've got my workforce that's now distributed. I've got people using cloud software. I've got different kinds of security for people at home or wherever it is that they're now accessing, my business software, my business infrastructure. What should I be doing now to be preventative rather than waiting for the worst to happen?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, I mean, you have this distributed workforce that's all over. I mean, the first thing is to get a clear picture of what it is actually that you have. Okay, what are these resources that I'm using remotely? Create a catalog of all these services. And then based on that catalog, identify, okay, what type of information are these services processing, storing, and who has access to it? Because that's really the first step, is having that inventory of your resources. And if you look at a lot of the security frameworks that are out there, even the ones that say, cyber hygiene, the minimal things you should be doing, is the first step is know what you have. Because if you don't know what you have, then you can't protect it accordingly. And then after that, then you can start to decide what type of security controls I can start implementing to protect it. Some of them, if it's a cloud resource, they might have inherent controls or controls that are built in that all you have to do is enable. Even from a monitoring perspective or an access, if they have multi-factor, then you should probably enable it. If they've got some type of monitoring, you should probably enable that and look at those logs. So, those are really the two key critical steps. Is first identify what you have, and then try to identify the controls that need to be implemented based on how critical these assets are.
Given this lack of visibility, is there any kind of a monitoring program or something like that business owners can employ to try to counteract that issue?
Yeah, I mean, monitoring can be taken at different levels. When you're talking about cloud services, a lot of the cloud services do provide the ability to be able to monitor the activity, whether you're using something on your end that it's going to supply that information to you, or the application itself provides a dashboard or the ability to view logs and activities associated with that application. There's plenty of choices associated with that. And then there's also the choice of monitoring what's on your endpoint. Whatever device the user or your employee is using to access these resources, there's technology that can be placed on the endpoints that's able to track activity and even prevent potential malicious activity from happening, whether it's the downloading of malware or when you click on a link, if something's going to happen. A lot of times this endpoint software can protect the laptop or the device from some type of malicious activity.
Now, is that something as a business owner that I could theoretically do myself, or do I, because it sounds like it's something that I need, someone like you to do. I have trouble hooking up the webcam, my computer. So
yeah, I mean, the endpoint security starts with your traditional antivirus type, which you can install yourself or comes free with Microsoft. But when you're talking about monitoring technology, you may want a third party or more knowledgeable person to look at it, only because there's other features associated with it, which unless you're either familiar with security or in IT, you may not be that familiar with what to do. There's policies associated with it that enable functionality and block functionality within your endpoint. And if it's not done properly, you could potentially lock yourself out of the computer or from using a resource that you need. So definitely, I always recommend do get the guidance and the assistance from some of the experts out there.
A lot to take in, Will, but really appreciate you spending the time with us today. That's been tremendously helpful. Again, it's Will Mendez. He's the head of Friedman's Sizen Cybersecurity Company. And Will, thank you very much for being with us today on Outlook from the Inside.
No, thank you for having me.